Right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here and tuning in. Yeah, fun to have you all be a part of things. Appreciate you all. If you want to tune in from wherever you're at, and if you want to type in to the chat and stuff where you're calling in from, that would be great. Yeah, it's trying to be a gorgeous morning here, actually. And so much rain in like the last couple days. All right, let me get this all set up. I'm going to start recording here. All right. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to our latest session of the end of the world as we know it. It's the rewilding and primal take on that. Welcome. I'm looking outside. It's funny because, in the last few days, it's been pretty gloomy here, which I don't really say that very often because I really like the rain, but it's been like really cloudy and really rainy. It's always that's normal for this time of year where I am in the Cascadia. And now the sun's coming out and you can see the lights in the backyard and there's a little bit of blue sky and there's fall colors. And I'm like, oh, great. Doesn't exactly match the tone of the topic for today, which is to talk about this funny, interesting, thought-provoking concept of the zombie apocalypse. And I want to start by saying, like, this is a real thing for some people, and I'll kind of explain why. It's also a very sort of silly, almost playful, joking meme for a lot of people. So this notion of the zombie apocalypse is like, it's now like a meme in our culture, right? It's like this kind of thing of like, oh, is this going to happen or not going to happen? Or it's like a joking thing. Several years ago, the Department of Homeland Security put out an actual parody, how to prepare for a zombie apocalypse, like handbook or something like this. And of course, this freaked out a whole bunch of people who believed that a zombie apocalypse could happen. So, seeing as it's like Halloween, or it's gonna be Halloween in a couple days, it's Day of the Dead on Monday. I thought we could start to we could talk about this and kind of untangle some of the ideas here. And for me, I find it really interesting when you go deeper into this topic, some of the almost mythic or mythopoetic ideas that are embedded in this sort of fear or energy we put into this idea of the zombie apocalypse. So as part of our ongoing The End of the World as We Know It, survival, rewilding, sessions, I'm going to talk a little bit about this today. And feel free to add any questions into the chat or where you're calling from or whatever. And thanks for those of you who are attending live. So if you're watching this later, it'd be fun to watch this on Halloween or on Day of the Dead on Sunday or Monday. So the first piece I want to talk about is that, okay, so like there's this theme or meme in video games, in novels, in movies, and around this some sort of event that would happen that would turn everybody into zombies, or almost everybody. And then there's a few surviving humans fighting against these mindless hordes that if they get, and sometimes the idea is it's like some sort of infectious agent that turns people into zombies. The original stories, I think it wasn't that case. It was like some sort of magical thing. But it is interesting. And there's, some TV shows around this, I guess. I haven't really watched them, Walking Dead and stuff like that. And I'm not a big fan of zombie TV shows and stuff like that. But it's also a common theme in these, what you call the end of the world as we know it, novels, these sort of post-apocalyptic novels. One of the scenarios is the zombie apocalypse. So, yeah, and it's this idea that there's a small group of humanity and the rest of humanity, something terrible has happened to them and they are like mindless, ravaging, or that and sometimes it's like they're dead and they come back to life. And so like, well, why would we even bother to talk about that? Like, and then what's really interesting is I have actually run into a few people here and there over the years that they sincerely think something like this is going to happen. And I'm not ever quite sure what to make of that. And there's kind of two streams of this. So I'm gonna parse this out. So one of them is it's like kind of this idea that actually it's probably some sort of infectious agent, like a disease that would happen and it would infect massive numbers of people and basically cause them to lose their ability to function at a higher level cognitively. And then there would just be this kind of us versus them battle. And you know, with COVID coming out, and then like, you know, all the debate around the vaccine and stuff, there is some, you know, there's something that like people have looked at that like one of the things that could really alter our society, cause some really serious changes for us very rapidly, would be some sort of infectious disease that we don't have any treatments for. And that some people have mentioned that we're pretty lucky that COVID is actually not as serious as some of these other infectious agents. If you want to find out about, you know, how some of these things could work, I'm going to type into the chat here. You should look up the stories of cordyceps fungus. And cordyceps is actually, it's used, you probably have heard of it maybe, as it's a fungus that's actually harvested, and it has a lot of health benefits for humans. It's good for our lungs, good for our brains, good for our hearts. But cordyceps actually is a real organism. It's a real fungi. And it actually does take over the bodies of hosts it infects in the insect world. So both ants, caterpillars, in fact, cordyceps is sometimes called caterpillar fungus, and then I think some other insects and or arthropods, it can take over, and it literally takes over their bodies and then can cause them to do things. Cordyceps will sometimes take over an ant, cause the ant to climb up a tree, then take over its body, and it kills the ant, and then it releases its spores from a very high level, so that then the cordyceps spores are sprayed out over a wide area. So yeah, there's this idea of like theoretically some sort of organism causing this, and that the zombies are a disease, right? That they're something like that, right? And so we would need to be prepared to handle the zombies, right? And so people sometimes, you know, take this quite seriously, and they have food and they have water and they have weapons. And so I was, you know, I think most of the people I ran into over the years with that, they also kind of didn't take it super seriously, or it was just like kind of a joke, or maybe it was a kind of a dark humor sort of a thing. But then I started to hear these things. So I was looking this morning for this sword I have. I do actually have several swords. Most of them I use just for martial arts training. I don't use them for a lot of things, but I have a sword that was given to me by a student. And there's kind of a long story about this sword. This sword was originally given to one of our teachers. That teacher passed away, and then their stuff was passed on, and then that student wanted me to have that sword. And it's a sword they had made, custom made by this really gifted blacksmith. But they had the sword was called the Zombie Killer. And I was just kind of like, that's kind of strange, but it's actually designed, it's a live blade, so it's sharp. It's the only sword I really have that's actually a live blade, you know. And so the Zombie Killer, I was like, well, what is this for? And it's literally, you know, like you would have in one of those movies to like fight zombies or whatever, right? But then I started to find this like darker kind of path. This information started coming out to me, like people who talked about they would go into like a gun store, and there's this phrase they would use. They wanted a zombie killer, which kind of, I was like, oh, that sounds like the sword or whatever. And I found out that like there's some people who believe that we're going to face a societal collapse, and there's going to be the people who are prepared. You know, some of those are preppers or not, you know, whatever. There's people who are prepared, they're going to have stuff. And then there's going to be a lot of people who don't have any stuff. and those people don't have food. They don't have good access to food. They don't have good access to hygiene or whatever. And then they're just going to roam around trying to steal everybody's stuff and breaking into stuff. And there's going to be a lot of civil unrest. And so there's this idea that those people are the zombies. So even though they're still they're not infected by an infectious agent or anything like that, they're the zombies out there that we need to have our zombie killers, which is actually a code for like something that could actually kill a human being. And I was like, whoa, that is a pretty dark version of how this might unfold. And so it's kind of like in some of the prepper world, the end of the world as we know it, group of people, that zombie phrase can be a code word for the people who are not ready, the people who are not prepared, and they're going to come and try and take your stuff. Now, I think I've talked with most people who paid attention to these recordings that that's not exactly my philosophy of how anything is going to go down in terms of a collapse or falling apart, and that we actually probably want to know our neighbors and want to be able to grow food rather than have lots of guns and ammo. But I was kind of startled by finding out that, oh, like there's these people out there that they're preparing, and they think of other people as zombies. Like it's kind of this dehumanizing thing, right? So it's like, well, why would we even think about zombies or zombie apocalypse, or what's going on about like having a zombie apocalypse, and why does this keep coming up? And so for some people, it's a fear-based thing, right? And, generally speaking, I think a lot of us have probably experienced this. If we have something that we're really afraid of and we put a lot of energy into it, well, those things tend to kind of show up in our lives, right? So, and the more we think something, the more we believe something, often the more we start to interpret the world as like fueling that idea, right? So I would caution us to be careful about how much energy we're putting into seeing other people as zombies and dehumanizing them, and that they're enemies, and that we're going to have to, fight them off because they're going to try and steal the food that we've managed to store away. My approach to ideas of societal collapse or some sort of big change in our lifetime, as I'm sure people who are listening to this have noticed, are much more along the lines of let's all be prepared as a society for like less energy intensive, less getting all of our stuff from across the world kind of lifestyle, and growing some of our own food, and knowing the farmers that live near us and things like that. And resilience, like that's where I think the word resilience comes in really nicely. It's like if we were all resilient, right? If we were all trained to be resilient, I think there would be a much more, we'd be much more prepared for handling tough scenarios, whether it's intense weather events, it's supply chain issues. I think the supply chain issue thing that's going on, it's starting to resolve a little bit, is a great example though of how overly dependent we are on things that come from really far away to make our everyday life happen. Though apparently with the whole supply chain thing, as we know, it's not really that big a deal because people's lives are not really affected. It's just a bunch of stuff we actually probably don't really need that's trying to come in from China. And even with the cars thing, so I don't know, those of you who are tuning in from Europe, if you've caught on to this, but there's this whole thing in America right now where nobody can buy cars because of there's a backlog on the chips that come in, and then we need these computer chips for these cars. So, but you don't actually hear of all these people being like, oh, I can't get a car, or I can't get anywhere because my car broke down. And it's like, actually, people still just are driving their old cars more, there's a little bit of a tough time like getting used cars too now because there's a huge demand for used cars. But again, it's like, well, how many cars do we really need, right? So anyway, getting back to the zombie apocalypse, I encourage people to work on being resilient in your house, resilient in your car, resilient when you go out into the woods or the wilderness, right? But there's a whole other level of the zombie apocalypse thing that one of the people who watches these and follows my email list and has taken some of my classes reached out to tell me about, and it reminded me I'd heard this story before. So Patricia, I want to thank you for reminding me of this and bringing this to my attention. And it's this whole other idea of the zombie apocalypse. And it's this idea of like, well, why do we have this thing about zombies right now? And it's like, okay, well, what are zombies? Well, there's humans that are like half dead and half alive. They're not fully alive and they're not fully dead. And they're mindless, right? Like they don't have the ability to have discernment or cognition, right? So, and there's this idea, there's a whole bunch of them, right? And then there's people who are more, can still think. Well, if you look at like some of the stuff going on in the United States and some of the people getting really hyped up into certain belief systems or certain ideas, and like kind of losing a little bit of their mind, you can see how like, oh, like maybe there is this kind of more collective lack of discernment or awareness going on. And then you take that to kind of another level around our devices, and myself included, like how much we spend time on our smartphones and how much we're distracted from reality and how much we're not actually paying attention to things around us, how mindless we are becoming by being on those devices, right? That we are actually turning somewhat mindless. And there's a lot of us that are spending a lot of time being mindless. Maybe we're already becoming some sort of metaphoric zombie, right? We're losing. And then I worry, you know, about my children. My oldest child is a teenager, and you know, on some level they have to figure out how to regulate themselves on their device. But like the amount of time and amount of identity is wrapped up into this virtual world that they're spending all the time in. It can be really tough for them to not be on their device sometimes. And just, yeah, like what does that say? Like how zombified are we becoming from social media or media in general? And so Patricia was reminding me of this, and also the word apocalypse, right? So if we throw that word around here, I've even written some blogs about this, right? An apocalypse, the original meaning of apocalypse is awakening. And so a zombie apocalypse, like maybe what we really do need is a zombie apocalypse. We need to wake up from this zombie-like state we're getting sucked into every day through our devices and through our computers. And I'm talking to all of you through a computer, so you know, it's kind of funny. But like, yeah, what if we can just turn off our devices, have what they're talking about more and more, this idea, I think this is a great way of describing it, a digital detox, like going out in nature, like getting away from our devices and unzombifying ourselves, like taking a break from that zombie world of mindlessly scrolling through the internet or whatever it might be, or Netflix and chill, where we're just like binging, you know, episode after episode, and we're not moving, we're not thinking, we're just like passively sitting there. How can we be more active agents? How can we wake up more, right? So I think there's some pretty interesting reflections on ourselves of like why zombies are so big these days as a theme, and what is it telling us about ourselves as human beings, right? Like what is it actually reflecting about our state as human beings, that there's this collective meme around zombies and some sort of end of the world thing. And also, yeah, what does it say about our fears? And also, is there a message there about like, if we're not being more mindful and aware of our surroundings and our world and the natural world, like what's happening to all of that as it just keeps deteriorating and we're just paying more attention to our devices and the world is just like kind of falling apart out there? It's like, wait a second, if we can get off our devices and then we can actually engage with reality. But the more distracted we are, the less likely it is we seem to be able to find solutions for challenges we're facing. Especially, it seems like the challenges around climate change and environmental issues. So those are some kind of zombie apocalypse type of things to just kind of think about. And I do want to put it on everybody's radar screen that there are people out there that are buying guns or have bought guns or have a stockpile of stuff because they're convinced there's going to be some sort of a horde of mindless humans running around trying to get their stuff. So be careful of those folks. Yeah, maybe we can help those folks decide that maybe it's better to know your neighbors and grow some food and be resilient altogether. The last thing I want to share, though, that I think is kind of interesting is, and why I want to do this around this time of year, is there is this time of year where collectively in the Northern Hemisphere, and all the way down to the equator, we do celebrate this strange holiday. And, you know, it's Halloween here, but some of the older names for it are Samhain and even the Day of the Dead, which is November 1st and 2nd. And if you think of some of the classic Halloween costumes and decorations, like if you look at them, like the classic Halloween decorations, it's things like vampires, which are dead, the undead, skeletons, which are the dead, it's zombies, which are, like we were just talking about, like half dead or half alive, and it's things like werewolves and witches and these things. There's a lot of ancestral themes and the idea of honoring or being aware of the dead and kind of flipping this concept of the zombie apocalypse into like a little bit more relevance for like rewilding and reweaving culture and, you know, creating a more healthy culture and vibrant culture going forward. The most cultures I know of that have a healthy relationship to nature and have a healthy cultural relationship between people they're nature connected, that are people connected, have some way of honoring the ancestors, whether it's on a daily basis, an occasional basis, or even a once a year big holiday around the ancestors, the honored dead, those who have passed on. And I was just talking with some people about that this morning, including John Young and Gene Tagaban. We're getting ready for our next class on Monday in our intuitive tracking class about that tradition of people. Sarah Fontaine was part of that conversation about people honoring the ancestors and where they come from and how that's part of a healthy collective way. And if we don't honor that, if we don't pay attention to it, then you get this idea of like, oh, we're kind of haunted by the past. We're haunted by those that came before. And, you know, I could do a whole class on that. It's a big topic. Do a week class or, you know, an immersion on the ancestors and our connection to them and where we come from and what does that even mean. But the idea that they're somehow real in some sense, that they have some sort of influence on us. And I don't know if that's epigenetics. I don't know what that exactly is, but there's a lot of powerful teachings around the world about that. Well, I want to see if there's any questions or comments anybody has about what I've shared today. Anything people want to add in, you're welcome to. And yeah, I encourage everybody to take some time over this weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, even Tuesday, and think about, you know, what do the ancestors mean to you, and where do you come from, and what does that our fear of the dead, our fear of death, our fear of the unliving, like what is that, where does that come from? And do we as a culture have a healthy relationship with death? You know, is it something that we have, and what would that look like? One of my roommates, I think I've mentioned this to some of you before, his ancestry is from Mexico, and so he's honors the Day of the Dead, and it's just a thing that you do on November 1st and 2nd, and it's this big thing in Mexico. And it's, you know, there's a lot of skeletons that are put out that are decorated, like skulls that are beautifully decorated, and altars are set up on different corners, and like candles are lit and bread is offered. And it's this really beautiful thing, the Day of the Dead. So, all right. And I wanted to let everybody know for the next few weeks, I'm going to be on these Fridays, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about being prepared and how we get ready for seasonal changes. I've got a special challenge coming up. It's going to be the winter 5-day winter resilience and preparedness challenge. It's going to start, I think, on November 11th. It's going to go for 5 days, and it's like each day it's going to be kind of like this. It's like a half an hour to 45 minutes, maybe an hour of like a mini lesson focused on survival and winter and being prepared for seasonal change. And then at the end, we'll have some assignments and some exercises to do. And then starting in the new year, because I've heard from some of you that you want to try this out, we're going to do a small group 6-month survival group, like that we're going to do like, training each month, have assignments and work to go through so that we can really feel comfortable about facing challenges like, in our home, if we got stranded in our vehicle, if we're out in the backcountry, what are the essential things we really do need to know, and how do we practice those skills, and how do we develop more of that competence, more of that resilience? So it might not prepare you for the zombie apocalypse, but it should cover a lot of other bases. So all right, well, thanks everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be here next week. We'll have another fun one of these, and I'll send this recording out probably on Monday with a couple other things. But thanks for tuning in. Have a happy Halloween and happy Samhain and Day of the Dead. And yeah, if you want to share with me in an email or message me or whatever about how you're honoring the ancestors, I'd love to hear about it. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great day.